Hello, guys. First of all, I want to say a big thank you for indicating your interest in this video, where I get to share tips and tricks of basically hitting a good score for the MSRA exam. So, first of all, introduction. I'm Dr. Okai. I'm an IMG. I graduated in 2016. I've not had any specialty training yet, so I've been working as a medical officer in Nigeria for the past 4 years. Not for the past 4 years, for 4 years before I relocated to England 2 years ago with my family. So I've been involved in full-time childcare, full-time parenting over the past 2 years. During this period, I've written the PLAB 1 and the PLAB 2 exams, gotten my GMC license, and then I sat for the MSRA exam. I'm grateful for the privilege to be able to share from my experience, having had a score of 609, which I wasn't expecting, to be very honest. But yeah, I believe one or two things I may share here will be of immense benefits, even as you prepare for the next exam, which will be holding in January. So let's get into it, shall we? So, what is the MSRA exam? For the benefit of those that don't have much of an idea of what the exam is, what it is for, and what it entails, I'll just do a quick summary to capture all this information. So the MSRA, it's the abbreviation for Multi-Specialty Recruitment Assessment. So it's basically a test to assess doctors and evaluate their readiness for specialty training. So this test is made use of by certain specialties. The common ones we are aware of: GP, psychiatry, anesthesia, obstetrics and gynecology, radiology, ophthalmology, emergency medicine, core surgical training, neurosurgery, and nuclear medicine, as well as sexual and reproductive health. So all these specialties make use of the MSRA, either the MSRA alone or in combination with other portfolio contents like other criteria or evidences, interviews, all those things put together. But for the GP and psychiatry entrance, which most of the people that have contacted me have indicated interest in, the MSRA is 100% responsible for determining whether or not a doctor gets an offer in any of these specialties. So, as we are aware, the MSRA has undergone a significant change over the past year or two, not necessarily in its content or in its format, but for the mere fact that it has become more competitive than it has ever been in the past. Very likely because more doctors are taking this exam to go straight into training. Unlike many other exams whose success is determined solely by the score, the MSRA is not only determined by the score you get, but also by the scores that other candidates get. So the better the candidates in a particular cohort do, the more competitive that the exam for that round it will be. And we have noticed a trend over the years. For example, about 4 years ago, an MSRA score of 430, 400 was a very good score, very sufficient to get one into GP training. However, we've noted that that's no longer the case. For example, this is like a rough estimate based on surveys conducted on social media by doctors that sat the exams over the past couple of rounds. So January last year, the lowest score to have gotten an offer, a GP offer, was 440, a score of 440. And currently in this round, so far, the least score that has been reported to have received an offer is 522. Of course, we know that this will change even as more candidates let go of their GP offers for their preferred specialties. More offers will be made available for candidates with lower scores. But the reason why I created this slide was to give us an idea of how things are changing. The exam has gotten significantly more competitive, meaning that we don't have the option of taking it for granted at all. So with regards to the structure and the format, the exam comes in two sections. Okay, it's a computer-based exam. First of all, it is time-based, and the first part is the professional dilemma, or what we call the SJT, situational judgment test, and the second part is the clinical problem-solving section. It always comes as SJTs before the clinical, so you don't have the option of picking the clinicals first. So usually there's an optional 5 minutes break in between. So for the SJTs, there are 50 questions, last 95 minutes. The clinicals, 97 questions, last 75 minutes. So in total, the exam takes an average of 170 minutes in total. For this exam, both the professional dilemma and the clinical aspects contribute 50% respectively to your total score. So each aspect of the exam is extremely important to ensure that you have a good score. There's no negative marking. So the aim of the exam is to make sure that you complete all questions and you do it in a timely manner, because the time does seem to go really fast if you start the exam before. You can attest to this. So you really need to be conscious of time. So we'll be talking a bit more about that in a few seconds. All right, so now to the resources. There are tons of resources available, from the online question banks to actual textbooks and website links. Regarding the question banks, we've got different options. There's eMedica, Samson's, Pass Medicine, MCQ Bank, Pass Tests, Pass Med. These are the common ones. They all have their pros and their cons. For example, Pass Medicine, which I used, appears to be the most affordable. I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my research, it's the most affordable, but it's also quite bulky. It's about 3,000 questions in total, which is a lot. It is a lot. That can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. If you're starting your preparation early, say 4 months in advance, it's an advantage because it helps, from my personal experience and from what others have also reported. The Pass Medicine helps to give a very solid foundation especially for your clinical knowledge. So it helps candidates to grasp the concepts of the different specialty and the questions that come up from those specialties. However, if you're running out of time, I would not recommend Pass Medicine, as it is very time consuming. Like I mentioned, the questions are bulky. They're not very similar to the questions you'll see on the exam. So that is a con. MCQ Bank, as I heard, is quite similar to the exam. Questions are not so many, about half of what's the total number of questions in Pass Medicine. A bit more expensive than Pass Medicine. Medica also seems to be good. From what I've heard, it's got great systems to aid your learning. Okay, lots of mock tests, time mock tests, and all of that. Samson's, from my experience, appears to have the questions which are closest to the actual exam questions. The explanations may not be as thorough as what you see in Pass Medicine, but for the final lap of your preparation, I'll always recommend Samson's. Questions are very similar to the exam questions. Straightforward, quick, concise, brief, concise explanations. And from what others have also experienced, Samson's have been super helpful. I'll be explaining about the Samson more in a couple of minutes. I'll be going into details with how I prepared for my exams with Samson and Pass Medicine. So regarding the textbooks, the number one textbook is the Oxford SJTs, Oxford Handbook of Situational Judgment Tests. So it's great. It's got the different categories of the professional dilemmas that you would expect to encounter in the exam. So from coping with pressure to teamwork, communication and empathy, patient safety, all of those domains are well categorized in the textbook. Explanations are not so great, but one thing I will always advise is don't argue with the answer. Try to analyze the answers, rationalize them, and inculcate it into your reasoning, as that really is the only solution to getting a hold of this professional dilemma. I'll be going into further details regarding the SJTs in a few minutes. So this is just like a brief overview. The 100 professional dilemma scenarios is also a textbook, very handy, very concise, but it's got great explanations. I think if you've never had any experience with SJTs, this is a good starting point as it explains each of the domains very well. The questions are not so many, just 100, but it gives a great introduction into SJTs, especially for IMGs, into SJTs and what this entails. There are also other websites that are very helpful, like the official MSRA practice materials. You can get that online. It covers both clinicals and SJTs. There's a good medical practice guideline, very helpful in understanding the foundation of the SJT or the professional dilemmas, the ethical aspect of your answers, of how to reason through the answers, especially when you're having challenges with certain scenarios, certain situations. You're not understanding the explanation that's been given in Oxford SJT. It's a good reference material, and I would always advise, if you've got the time, you can always, you should go through it as much as you can. It will help you not only for the exam, but also for your future practice in the NHS. The NICE guidelines are also a great reference point, especially for the clinical aspect. If you're having trouble understanding certain concepts, certain topics, is a good reference material as well. So the key question, the big question everyone asks, how many question banks should be used that guarantee the score above 550? Because that's what we're trying to aim for. It's a tricky one, but I think I put a tip there. Too many cooks spoil the broth. So I've met people that have used 4 question banks, 5 question banks, and they're not getting the results that they're expecting. In all honesty, I don't think you should use more than 2 question banks. I'm talking about question banks, not materials in total. So you can use your Oxford SJTs. That's not included in what I refer to as question banks. For question banks, I'm strictly speaking about Samson's, MCQ bank, past medicine, past tests, all those materials in Medica. You shouldn't use more than 2. You want to be able to stick with 1, 2 reliable materials, question banks, that you can consolidate ideas with. You can familiarize yourself with the pattern of the questions, with the pattern of the answers as well. You want to be able to reason in a certain way, and having to make mental reference to several question banks in the limited time you have as in the exam setting will be a challenge. The brain works more efficiently when you've got less things to make reference to memory wise. So it's always advisable not to use too many. Okay, so to my background. I mentioned my background already. So I studied medicine in Ghana, worked in Nigeria for 4 years, relocated 2 years ago, been a stay-at-home mom, got 2 kids under 4, spent the last 2 years preparing and sitting for the Plan 1 and 2 exams. No NHS experience, no clinical attachments, no study groups. A lot of people really wanted to know my background. With regards to the exam, so for the MSRA exam, I've written it twice. The first time was last year. I had a score of 545. I did get my first offer, my first choice, or my first preference. Yeah, I got the location I wanted. However, I couldn't start. I decided not to proceed with the training at the time for personal reasons. Sitting for the exam was not among my plans. It was a friend that just told me about it. So I had literally a month to the time of the exam to prepare. What did I use? I used the Samson MCQ bank, as well as Oxford SJTs and the 100 professional dilemma questions that I mentioned earlier. I did have an advantage. I had just sat for my PLAB 1 exam a month before this, so I had a good clinical grasp of most of the specialties and the topics. I used PLAB books to prepare for the PLAB 1 for about 3 months, reading on average about an hour to 2 hours a day on most days, not every day. Because when you got little kids running around, not going to nursery every day, your hands are literally tied the entire period. So it was not the easiest. But I was able to do this. With regards to Samsons, I couldn't cover the questions category by category. What I did was, because I had just a month, literally the only thing I could do was focus on the Oxford SJT, since that was new territory to me. So I read it page by page. I read 100 professional dilemma questions as well, page by page, just to try and understand what it really covered, what it entailed. And then with regards to Samsons, I stuck to just the mocks. So I did the mocks, I think, twice. I went over the mock questions twice. I was targeting a score of about 88 to 90%. So anytime I got any score less than that for the Samson mocks, I'd redo it to make sure that my incorrect questions were rectified. So I made sure the last 2 weeks to the exam, I did timed practice that for about 2 hours every day, and I was able to get a score of 545. So I decided to sit the MSRA again, September of this year. And what was my approach? I started 3 months in advance. I subscribed to Past Medicine, to Samson, and then I got my Oxford SJT out. This time around, what did I do differently? I started the SJTs at the beginning of my exam preparation. So I started it 3 months in advance. What I noticed is that a lot of people start with the clinical preparation and leave the SJTs for last. I would not recommend that. I will not recommend that. I'll be explaining why in a few seconds. So what was the advantage I had for this exam? I had a prior experience of the exam of the MSRA a year ago, because I started a year ago. So that was an advantage. However, I had less time per day to study. It was a summer holiday. Kids a bit more grown. They need more engagement. Taking care of them a lot more exhausting. My husband had started training, so his rota was a lot more hectic. The work on the home front was a lot more tasking. So literally, I had less time to prepare per day. So that was why I chose to start my preparation earlier than last year. So I was able to get an hour at least every day of just going through the questions, the past medicine. I completed about 2,000 of the questions in past medicine. I did Samson's all the categories. I mentioned last year it was only the mocks that I did, but for this time around, I went through all the categories, specialty by specialty, before proceeding to the mocks towards the end of my preparation period. I did the Oxford SJTs. I went through it once. I didn't get the chance to go through the 100 professional dilemma questions, but that will always be useful. And I targeted a score of 90 to 92% of the Samson's mocks. Ensured I did timed practice as well. Like I mentioned, an hour a day of studying for the first 2 months. Towards the end of the preparation period last month, I was able to get in about 2 to 3 hours a day. Okay, so for the first 2 months, I focused on the past medicine. Like we know, it has both clinical questions as well as SJTs. So what I did was I took the clinicals category by category. For example, if I'm starting with ophthalmology, for let's say I want to do ophthalmology and ENT this week, I'll start with ophthalmology. Today is Monday, for example. I'll do maybe 50 questions, try and cover that within my hour of study. The following day, I'll go to the SJTs. So I'll do probably like 10, 20 questions. That was when I started. My momentum was quite slow. So then Wednesday, back to my clinicals, ophthalmology. The next day, continuing my SJTs from where I stopped. So I ensured that I was doing the clinicals and the SJTs side by side. The mistake of leaving the SJTs for last should not be made by anyone. I will reiterate that. You should never leave the SJTs for last. Start them right at the beginning of your preparation alongside your clinicals so that it becomes a part of you. Okay? So for the final month, I had already completed about 2,000 questions of past medicine, including SJTs. And so I moved over to Samson's, where I did category by category and then the mocks as well. I also did Oxford SJTs page by page. So I was able to cover all of that. So we're here now. The study tips, the major study tips. Firstly, I'll advise that you create a study timetable. Like I mentioned, start early, a minimum of 3 to 4 months. Uh, Already, this information is a bit late because we've got literally just like 3 months left. So don't start too early, doesn't really apply here because yeah, basically. We don't want to start to, the reason why I say you shouldn't start too early is you don't want to get fatigued mentally because you can enter a form of plateau stage in your preparation where nothing just goes in or what you have learned, you've forgotten most of it. So I'll advise 3 months, 2 to 4 months of preparation is great. It's just the ideal sweet spot. All right. Next, I'll advise that you prioritize the high yield topics. There are some topics that will always show up in your exams: cardiology, neurology, pediatrics, rheumatology, dermatology. There's some questions that come, especially the ones you're not usually very familiar with, cases that you don't see commonly in your day-to-day practice. So cases from rheumatology, from ENT, ophthalmology, it's great to also cover these specialties as early as possible so that you're not lacking and you don't feel stranded on the day of your exam. So cover these topics, these specialties on time. Also advise that you target specific number of questions every day. This is very important because you need systems to ensure that you're covering as much ground as possible before the exam day arrives. So if you can aim for 50 to 100 questions every day in the first month. And as you begin to pick up momentum, as you begin to grasp the concepts better, as you begin to notice buzzwords, keywords, clinchers very easily, you are able to cover ground faster. So you can even take it up to 150 questions a day, 200 questions a day. That's what I did. My first month I was doing, in fact, I was doing like 30 questions a day because that initial drag will always be there, but you need to keep pushing to aim for a particular number by a certain period of time. So by my second, third week, I was already hitting like 50 questions. By my fourth week, I was hitting 100 questions. And when you hit 100 questions, please don't step down. The aim is to go higher and higher. You understand? All right. So the next tip: study by categories. Very, very important. In the initial period, you should study the clinicals, especially um, by specialty. The reason for this is you want to consolidate facts in your mind. And the only way you can do this is through repetition. So, for example, if I choose to start with cardiology, I'll be seeing cardiology questions every day. Let's say I want to cover cardiology this week. So for the entire week, I'm doing cardiology. There may be like 200 questions. If I choose to do 50 questions, 50 questions every day, I'll be able to solidify certain concepts. Okay, and it tends to stick better. The memory is able to form connections around those topics. The brain is able to rewire itself around those topics in such a way that when it's time for the exam, you're able to retrieve the facts more efficiently. So in the initial period, try and do the question banks specialty by specialty. In the final 4 to 6 weeks, you can now start mixing it up so that you can get accustomed to how the exam situation actually is, which is mixed up. But in the initial period, it's advisable that you start by specialties. The next tip is study using a timer. Time practice, very key. All right, because very important that you simulate the real exam conditions. It's advisable to use maybe 15 to 20 minutes less time than the actual exam scenario offers, right? So that you're able to get enough time on the day of your exam to go over your questions and make any corrections if necessary. So try and start your timed mocks as early as possible, your time practice as early as possible. Next tip is to learn on the go. We want to maximize time as much as possible. Time is limited. We've got literally just 3 months or less to the next exam. So you want to maximize the time you've got. A lot of us are busy, either taking care of children or working full time, doing busy rotas, night shifts, on calls, weekend on calls. balancing work and family, and it can be quite a lot to be able to find the time to actually sit down and study for 2 3 hours. So how do you want to retrieve or reclaim some of the time you have during the course of your day? It's by looking for pockets of free time where you can just go through your study materials. For example, I use my past medicine as I mentioned earlier, and it has this feature called Knowledge Tutor, which gives bite-sized information that are linked to actual questions in the question bank. So it gives bite-sized questions with bite-sized answers. So you're able to go through so many concepts in a very short period of time. What did I do? Maybe if I'm on the bus commuting to the town center or to pick up my kids from nursery or whatever, I'll open my phone, go through those questions. They're quick, so you're able to get information in constantly, even with the limited time that you have. You can do it while you're waiting in the reception, maybe you're going for a program. You can do it on the bus, on the train, during your lunch breaks, you know. Uh, the Oxford SJTs, thankfully, there's a soft copy. You can whip up your phone, go through some questions, just make sure that you're constantly studying on the go to just make use of the little extra time you have during the course of your day. That's a very solid tip, especially for busy people. So my next tip is to track your progress. Regularly review how much ground you have covered um, compared to the amount of time you've got left to the exam date, right? You want to know how many weeks have I got? I've got 3 weeks left. Okay, how many questions have I not yet covered? How can I restructure my targeted number of questions per day to be able to cover the amount of work I've still got in the limited time I have? So regularly review how much progress you've made and then adjust your study plan accordingly. My next tip is don't be discouraged. This is from personal experience. My first couple of weeks of studying, especially with past medicine, the questions were not making sense. Neither were the answers. I could not understand what was going on. I felt like I don't understand. Did I not go to medical school? What's going on here? So yeah, uh, it can be a bit discouraging in the initial period where you're still trying to grasp some of the concepts, some of the topics, and all of that. But not be discouraged. Please keep going. Keep going. Before you know it, you're answering the questions like a baddie. You understand? So don't get discouraged. Keep going. Don't get discouraged, right? Okay. So I'll also advise when you're booking your exam, pick a suitable time. If you're a morning person, pick a morning time. If you're a late day person, pick an afternoon exam slot. Last year, when I went for my exam, the thing is, it was my fault because I didn't book my test on time. I knew the dates the test will be released, the test dates will be released for booking, but I just felt, I didn't just rush to book it on time. I don't know what happened. Anyway, by the time I went online to pick a date for my exam, it was late. It was already too late. So the venues in my city, number one, were already taken. And then the times available in the city closest to me were just afternoon times. And I am not an afternoon person. So by the time I went for my exam, I was exhausted. I was hungry. I'd eaten, but I was just feeling very drowsy because I had to travel to my exam venue that morning so that I could arrive in time. My mind was just foggy and cloudy, and I couldn't. The exam requires great deal of concentration, especially the professional dilemma. 170 minutes is not being. It's a long time. So you need to be in top form. Your mind has to be in top shape. You need to be well rested. You need to be well fed. You need to be unstressed. So the time you book your exam is very, very, very important. Okay, so my next tip is to have an accountability partner or a study buddy. I'm not really a study buddy kind of person. However, I do need accountability partners. So even though my accountability partner is not writing the exam at the time, they are important because they're the ones that push me. Laro, have you studied? How many questions have you done today? How far? How many topics have you done this month? They're the ones asking you questions. Okay, when next are you covering your SJTs? They are following up to make sure that I'm on top of my game. So if you're not a study buddy person like me, it is also very important to have an accountability partner who will keep pushing you, right? If you're a study buddy person, like a lot of my friends, please make use of study groups. I've heard countless testimonials of how helpful those study groups can be in preparation for this exam. So now we're here for the professional dilemma, which is the cocoa, the part of the exam a lot of IMGs struggle with, including myself. So, like I mentioned, my top tip for this section of the exam is to start preparation early. Nothing beats this. Please start preparing for this part of the exam early. Start early. Do it side by side with your clinical questions. Don't wait till the end. The reason why I keep emphasizing the fact that you have to start early is because of the kind of um, test it is. It's not a test of knowledge. It's a test of reasoning, right? And this reasoning, this kind of reasoning is dependent on a mindset. And mindsets require, to achieve a particular kind of mindset, your mind has to be trained. So basically, you're retraining your mind. I wrote see it as an acculturation here because um, you're being accultured to a new culture, right? So you're adapting yourself, you're adapting your mind to a new culture. And whose culture are you adapting to? The GMCs, as outlined in the Good Medical Practice Guidelines, right? So what's an acculturation? I just wanted to give a brief, explanation of what this is, just so that you can really appreciate the the kind of effort you need to put into preparing for the SJTs. Okay, so acculturation basically the process of cultural, social, and psychological change. It involves the receiving of cultural information such as values, beliefs, and behavioral norms. So this is the key. Values, beliefs, and behavioral norms. So it means that the way I was practicing in Nigeria is not how I adapt my questions while solving the SJTs here. The way I was practicing in India or Pakistan is not how I'll adapt my answers to the questions that I'll come across in the SJTs. So there's a lot of change in your values and your behavioral norms as you undergo preparation for this part of the exam. Okay, so the answers you give should reflect the fact that you have adopted a new system of thinking and acting. So you shouldn't fight that new system. Embrace it, don't fight it, right? Okay, so one may ask, how do I retrain my mind? Firstly, it's important to know that retraining the mind takes time. Unlike the clinical section, you are not just acquiring new information while preparing for this part of the exam. You are changing the way that you reason. So you should start early. Start early. The right resources are very important. You want to make use of your Oxford SJTs, as I mentioned. I said here you should finish it at least once, twice if possible. Very, very important. What next I'm going to say. Don't argue with the answers. Accept the answers and rationalize them, right? Accept the answer. Sometimes the answers may not make sense. You'll be like, this shouldn't be this case. What's going on here? If you're having trouble rationalizing it, make reference to the good medical practice, like I mentioned. It will give you a solid understanding of the key concepts that are being tested by virtue of this part of the test. So, patient safety and patient focus, communication, partnership, teamwork, relating well with your colleagues, relating well with patients and their relatives, commitment to professionalism, so confidentiality, autonomy, all those aspects of your clinical practice will be tested. These are the main pillars of what's going to be tested, right? Coping with pressure. All right, so when you're going through the questions, there are two things that will go through your mind. Those two things you should ask yourself to pick the appropriate answers or the appropriate ranks, right? So the first question is, what should I do? So you should prioritize what is ethically correct. So it is a should question, not a would. So it is what should I do rather than what would I do? What would I do will be making reference to your personal opinion or your personal experience, which does not count in this test. What counts is what is ethical. What counts is what the GMC guidelines advise, right? So what counts here is patient safety, professionalism, and equity over emotions and sentiments, over experience or our culture back at home. So another thing that can help you in this process of retraining your mind is making use of study groups and study partners. This will help to reinforce certain concepts. So the way you see things, a colleague or a friend might see things better in a better light, and they might be able to help you transform how you reasoned through that particular question. So it helps to bring clarification and reinforcement. So anytime you go, you also encounter a tricky question. You'll get many tricky questions. Remember the four pillars of medical ethics. So autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So you want to ensure that the patient's rights is respected, the patient's consent is taken into account, you're acting in the best interest of the patient, you're ensuring patient safety, so do no harm, and ensuring that there's fair treatment for all. Another important tip for retraining your mind with regards to the SJTs is to incorporate your clinical or your work experience into your thinking as you go through a question. What do I mean by this? Picture yourself in similar situations you may have encountered in the past and see yourself applying this newfound knowledge in such situations. By doing this, you'll be reinforcing your reasoning skills, right? You'll be reinforcing your reasoning skills because now you've taken the information provided by the Oxford SJTs in terms of the answers, and you're trying to apply it in your mind in a similar situation you've experienced in the past in your home country, for example. That way, you're doing more wonders for your brain than you don't even realize, than you realize rather. You're rewiring how you reason through situations so that when you come across such situations in the exam, you're able to you're able to tie in what you learned from Oxford SJTs, how you would have applied it in the past situation you experienced in real life, and you're able to transform it into the appropriate answer for the question you're encountering in your exam. So this does wonders for your mind. You have no idea. All right. So like I mentioned, this is a top tip. Analyze the rankings given in the answers and try to rationalize the reason why each answer is in a particular rank. So this is basically what I mentioned earlier. Rationalize, try and picture yourself, try and understand the reasoning behind it. All of this will help to do wonders for your mind. And on the exam day, don't overanalyze. This exam can be quite stressful. Remember that it's a time test, the clock is ticking. Trust that you have understood the ethical principles. Trust that you are making your decisions based on the ethical principles that you have understood, and move on. Don't spend too much time on a question. You're not doing yourself any good by doing that. So, what's the format of this SJT paper? Like I mentioned earlier, it's 95 minutes long. There are 50 questions. 50% of these questions are the ranking questions, while the other half is multiple choice. For the ranking questions, each answer is considered distinctly, not successively. While for the multiple choice, usually you're told to pick 3 correct answers out of maybe about 9 in total options. But all 3 answers, if taken collectively, should bring about a resolution of whatever problem has been presented in the question. So there are actually 2 different ways of testing, your situational judgment. The first one, like I mentioned, the ranking. Usually there are about 5 different answers given, and you have to rank them based on the most appropriate decision to be made. You should remember that they are considered distinctly, right? So make sure that you keep that in mind so that you do not assume that it's a successive answer being presented, right? Okay. All right. So it's also very important I remember that the answers are marked against predetermined keys, and the more similar your ranking is to the predetermined keys, the higher your score will be. So don't fuss over precision. Don't be obsessed over having the perfect ranking. As long as your ranking is similar to what has been established as the predetermined rank, you're likely to still get a good score for that question. Just try and stick with the core principles that we've mentioned earlier. Yeah, prioritizing patient safety, patient autonomy, professionalism, and all of those things. So when approaching your questions, how do we go about it? It's very important that you pause and understand the full context of the situation being presented. You want to know who the key players are. Yourself as the doctor, the patient relatives, is it your colleagues? Who are the key players, right? What is the conflict? Is it a problem of poor care, dissatisfaction? Is it a clinical problem, a safety concern? What are the risks involved? Is confidentiality being threatened? Is your working relationship with your colleague being threatened? Is the patient safety being threatened? So you want to find out what exactly is involved here. And it's very important that you're able to recognize the risks and prioritize the risks because not all risks are not equal. It's very important you know that in addressing the questions that you'll encounter in this test, right? Apply structured reasoning using GMC guidelines to select the most appropriate response. So you want to make sure that you're following the ethical reasonings, right? Not your gut feeling, not your sentiments, not your personal experience, like I mentioned earlier. So, for example, I wrote here usually, if you encounter a question that deals with patient safety, invariably, an immediate response will always precede or be ranked higher than delayed response, whatever the situation may be. As long as patient safety is involved, you should always prioritize what will ensure that the patient safety is not threatened, right? For a situation where as a junior doctor you're not sure what you're supposed to do, or you've not had experience doing a particular procedure, or you're out of your depths with regards to what your qualification or what your role as a junior doctor encompasses, it's always better to consult with your seniors compared to acting in isolation, right? And always remember patient autonomy and confidentiality in whatever situation, whatever scenario you encounter that involves those two domains. This exam can be quite stressful, especially the SJTs. So it's important that you remain calm, approach each situation logically, and you'll be fine, right? Remember that you are well equipped as long as you spend good time going through the ethical reasoning of each situation, each scenario, especially for the different domains. The truth is, the questions you get in the exam, you may not have seen them before. But as long as you understand the concepts for each domain, whether it's coping with pressure, whether it's working with colleagues, patient safety, professionalism, confidentiality, all of those, once you grasp the major concepts, you should be able to tackle any unfamiliar question you come across in the exam. Okay? Don't let the stress of the exam get to you. Usually, stress will just make you reason illogically. Okay, so the next very important aspect of this exam I wanted to address, in addition to the professional dilemma, is time management. It's something that a lot of us have struggled with. Uh, like we mentioned, it's a computer-based exam, strictly timed. It can get quite overwhelming when you see that your time is about to run out and you have not covered as many questions as you ought to have covered at a particular point in time. So it's important that you read each question carefully, but move quickly. Read them carefully. Don't skim because you don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to assume that you are familiar with this question and then you pick the wrong answer. Please read carefully but quickly. That's where practice comes in. Practice, practice, practice. This helps you to be both accurate and quick. Apportion your time wisely, right? Spend less time on easy questions. The fact that you got 90 questions to be answered in a specific period of time, you don't have to divide it and say, okay, each question I'm spending 60 seconds or whatever plan you may have devised. No, it doesn't always have to be like that. There's some questions that are very straightforward and easy. Don't spend time. Go by it, ensure you're accurate, quickly move on to the next one. Because there'll be some questions you will encounter that require a longer time for processing and picking the right answers. So please apportion your time wisely. Then for the difficult question that you see, this one is taking my time, flag it, move on, go to the next one. Don't fuss over the difficult one. Don't spend so much time. Time is of the essence, right? So there are some things that can help you with regards to managing your time when on the day of the exam. Practice with your timer. Do lots of time blocks. Start early, about 2, 3, 4 weeks before your exam, so that you're used to it. Don't wait till the last week before you start doing your time blocks. Please, 3, 4 weeks before the exam date, start your timed mocks. Don't waste time. Don't waste time. Even if you're doing one mock a day, it'll be super helpful. One mock a day, one mock every other day. But make sure you start your time mocks early, right? A good tip I'll mention here is a way of like helping to refresh your brain to be able to keep in time is making use of your 5 minute break. You've got an optional 5 minute break. So for some people, they may choose not to make use of it and just go straight from the SJTs into clinicals. I wouldn't advise that. I think it's good that you make use of the break, but make use of it quickly because 5 minutes does go by fast. So if you need to go use the loo, you can do that. Give yourself a good pep talk in the mirror. Smile, encourage yourself. If you feel the SJTs didn't go well, you're not the first. I don't think anyone who's done this exam has ever felt confident about the SJTs. Forget it and keep your mind forward. You've got the clinicals straight right on. So you have to refresh your mind for the next phase of the exam, which is usually the clinicals. So don't worry about the SJTs and just move on, right? So there's some mistakes I want to advise that you avoid. Like I mentioned, don't use too many resources. You want to avoid information overload. You don't want to stress your brain on the day of the exam to try and retrieve information. The more resources you use, the more difficult and stressful it is for your brain to be able to recollect how you're supposed to answer, what you're supposed to answer, right? I'm mentioning this in again because very important. Don't delay preparation for your professional dilemma. Start early. Practice, practice, practice. Timed practice, very key. Don't doubt your ability. You can do this. If you had 390 in the last exam, you still there's still an 80-90% chance of you scoring 580 or 600. So forget about what happened in the past. If you had 360, 400, 420, and you said you did everything I mentioned here, it doesn't matter. You still have a very good chance of getting a very good score. So do not let your past experiences make you doubt your ability. You are very, very capable. The people that had 600, they don't have two heads. So they don't have two heads. You are as capable, if not more capable than they are. There's nothing special. So first of all, the fact that you're even taking time out to watch this video means that you have set yourself up for success. You've taken the right steps in the right direction to get a good score on the next time you sit this exam. So please do not for any reason doubt your abilities. So tip for the exam day, a good night's sleep on the exam eve, very key. You don't want to be cramming and reading, stressing your mind the day before. There's no need for that. All that you have done leading up to that moment is very sufficient to prepare you to take and sit the exam successfully. A good breakfast, very key. Like I mentioned, it's 170 minutes long. The exam is like a marathon. So you need to be very well equipped. Your brain needs to be working well, You need to be able to maintain focus, concentration. You don't want to drift off. You don't want to be slow. You don't want any slow processing. Arrive early with your right identification documents, right? Stay calm, stay confident, stay composed. You are more than able to conquer this exam and get it over with. I mentioned earlier, forget your past negative experiences with the exam. Forget it. Um, Believe that you've got this and trust God, right? I'm a Christian. I believe that God helps us when we can't help ourselves. People say heaven helps those who help themselves. That's not true. It's the people that cannot help themselves that God is to help. So the scripture I put here, a horse is prepared for the day of battle, but victory is of the Lord. I've held on to this scripture throughout my exam preparation. I'm going to prepare for this exam, but I know that it's God that will give me the victory. So that's the mindset to have. You'll be fine. You'll do great. You've done all that you can to prepare for this exam, and you come out very successful, okay? So yeah, just a bit of my references. Thank you so much. Well, now at the end of the presentation, I'm glad you've been able to take time out. It's been quite a long presentation. I've got a cold. I'm just recovering, so my voice has been very nasal. I'm sorry about that. If there are some things I shared that were not very clear, please don't hesitate to either email me or put it in the comments. If you got any questions, you need anything to be clarified, put it in the comments. I'm very happy to shoot another video when I get to explore and answer any content, any questions you may have. And once again, you've got this. This exam is very conquerable. Anyone can have 600. Anyone. You've got this, and I wish you all the very best. All right. Thank you.